We've all had that moment, sitting in a room full of laughter, Netflix stories, small talk about the weather, and travel anecdotes told like everything is light and fine. Everyone looks relaxed, chatting away, flowing naturally with one another. But you hear something else, a slight tension in someone's voice, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a tiny pause no one else notices. You sense the layers of emotion underneath, as if the whole room is playing two songs at once, one everyone hears and one only you pick up. And the funny thing is, a lot of us were taught, don't be too sensitive, don't overanalyze everything, just chill. But deep down, you know you're not overdoing it. You're simply receiving an amount of emotional information most people don't see. That ability can sometimes make you feel separate, like you're in the room, but you don't really belong in it. Let me say this clearly. You're not weird. You're not too sensitive. You're not overthinking. You're just a deep thinker, someone who can read what isn't said, who sees the bigger picture, who connects the subtle shades in people's emotions and behavior. And today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the journey of living at that depth because it's beautiful, it's real, but it's also full of challenges. Come with me as we explore the inner world of deep thinkers, people who hear the silences too. When we talk about deep thinkers, picture this. There are people who don't just hear your words, they hear the silence between the sentences. They don't just see your face, they notice the micro signals, the tiny twitch at the corner of an eye, the almost imperceptible shift in breathing. At work, they're the ones who know a coworker is under pressure even though that person is still smiling and saying, "I'm good." At gatherings with friends, they're the ones who know who's pretending to be okay. In families, they pick up on tension that slips into the dinner table even though no one mentions it. That's not magic, it's emotional awareness and pattern recognition, the ability to connect subtle details most people overlook. And the interesting part is you don't choose this ability. It's like a biological radar that's always on. There's a famous saying, some people can't help but see what they see. I've always felt that line perfectly describes deep thinkers. They're not trying to analyze everything, they simply perceive more deeply. But that very perception carries a special kind of wound. When you see too clearly, you also feel too much. When you read the sadness someone else is hiding, you often carry it yourself. When you notice injustice, you can't ignore it. When you sense inauthenticity, you can't pretend it isn't there. A very American example in workplace culture, people are expected to stay positive, collaborative, and smiling through back-to-back meetings. But deep thinkers hear the exhaustion behind the laughter, the disconnect between what someone says and what they actually feel. They notice the unsaid, and sometimes that makes them feel like the only person standing in a room full of darkness that everyone else is calling light. In friendships, they're the ones who ask questions deeper than others expect. Are you really okay? How did that actually make you feel? A lot of people aren't used to that kind of connection. Culture teaches us to prefer comfort over truth. So deep thinkers easily get labeled intense, too sensitive, or overthinking. Let me say something you probably haven't heard enough. You're not weird. You're not too much. Your brain just operates at a depth society isn't used to running on. When you listen with attention. When you observe, you look with your heart. When you speak, you want to say what's real. And in a world that runs on speed, convenience, and surface level everything, people who live in depth often feel out of rhythm. Not because they're wrong, because their rhythm is different. They see things no one else sees. They understand things that don't need explaining. They feel things no one else admits. And when you live in a society that says, don't be so sensitive, while that very sensitivity is a core part of who you are, you start believing something is wrong with you. The truth is the opposite. It's a gift. The ability to see the bigger picture, the ability to recognize truth even when it's wrapped in pretty camouflage, the ability to touch someone else's heart without them having to say a word. But every gift has weight. The deeper your awareness, the more vulnerable you are, not because you're weak, but because you take in the world with all your senses, including the emotional ones most people never use. Remember this before we go further: there's nothing wrong with you. You're just living deeper than society is comfortable with. And that's the starting point for everything we're about to explore next. We've talked about the subtle detection skills of deep thinkers, people who read the silences, who feel the truth behind polite words. But there's another side to this experience, and it's where most of the emotional exhaustion for deep thinkers begins: the ability to absorb the emotions of an entire room. If you're a deep thinker, you've probably walked into a meeting and immediately felt something heavy in the air. Nobody said anything, everyone is still smiling, but you know something's off. Maybe it's unresolved tension, someone's disappointment, or just a quiet sadness the owner doesn't want to admit. You don't just notice it, you start to feel it. Like other people's emotions seep through your surface and anchor inside you. Elaine Aron, who researches highly sensitive persons, HSP, says about 20% of the population has a more sensitive nervous system that processes information more deeply and reacts more strongly to inner stimuli. If you feel emotions more intensely, if you absorb everything faster and deeper, that's not your fault. That's how your nervous system is wired. And it's also why you're the person others seek out when they need to be truly heard. I want to say something I've seen repeated over and over in research on vulnerability. People with deep empathy often become the group's emotional containers. They're the friend everyone texts when something happens, the coworker everyone vents to at lunch, the family member who always keeps the peace, always understands, always takes on other people's sadness like it's their natural duty. But here's what hardly anyone tells them: it comes at a very high cost. When you constantly absorb other people's emotions, you don't get regular tired. You experience a type of burnout we call compassion fatigue, exhaustion from feeling too much for others while getting nothing back. Deep thinkers have told me that sometimes they walk away from a conversation feeling like they just ran an emotional marathon. They don't understand why the other person feels lighter while they feel heavier. When you listen deeply, you're not just listening with your ears. You listen with intuition, with your body, with the subtle connections in your mind. You hold space for others and you hold the emotions they drop there too. In psychology, we call that emotional labor. And deep thinkers usually do it at the highest level, constantly, unpaid, and most importantly, unrecognized. Most people have no idea you spent energy holding them together. They just feel better after talking to you, but they don't realize you paid for it with your own energy. That's why many deep thinkers say they don't like big crowds, not because they hate people, but because they get overwhelmed by too many emotions at once. They say they need alone time, not to escape the world, but to rinse off the emotional layers they absorbed all day. In the modern world, where workplaces demand constant collaboration, where friend groups have nonstop group chats, where families expect you to always be there, emotional absorbers often feel like they never get a break. You can't connect deeply if you're drained. Empathy is a beautiful gift, but it wasn't designed to be given away completely with nothing left for yourself. You weren't born to be everyone else's emotional trash can. You're not obligated to carry sadness that doesn't belong to you. And most importantly, you have the right to set boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are doors with the power to decide who gets to come in, with what energy, and for how long. They protect your sensitivity instead of letting it burn you out. I've said it many times, empathy is never the problem. The problem is we don't have boundaries to protect that empathy. You can be the listener, you can be the supporter, you can be the one who sees pain others try to hide. But you're also a human being with a heart that needs care just like anyone else's. When you absorb every emotion around you, you have no space left to breathe, recover, or simply exist in a healthy way. And the truth is, if you don't learn to set boundaries, you'll keep burning out and wondering why you're so weak, when in reality you've been running on a higher capacity than anyone else in the room. So before we continue the journey of deep thinkers, hold this tight. Your ability to feel deeply is a gift. But like every precious gift, it needs protection, and boundaries are that protection. And when you've absorbed too much emotion from the world around you, one thing almost always happens: you start to learn how to shrink yourself. Not because you want to, but because it feels like the only way to survive in a loud, fast world full of chaotic emotional layers. This is when the normal mask begins to form. For many deep thinkers, that mask appears very early, sometimes as far back as school. Do you ever look back at your high school or college years and remember realizing you understood things too deeply, felt too much, or asked questions that made others uncomfortable? And instead of being encouraged, you were told, "Don't think so much, relax. You're always so serious." At work, the mask gets more sophisticated. American corporate culture demands collaboration, positivity, and balanced energy, but nothing too intense. So deep thinkers who see all the things that go unsaid often have to pretend they don't see anything. They dim their intuition so they don't make others uneasy. They adjust how they speak, how they think, even the speed of their emotions to fit the group's expectations. Among close friends, it's not much different. Deep thinkers are usually the ones who ask questions that go beyond the surface, who want to talk about truth, who want to clarify feelings. But not everyone wants that depth. A classic American example: at a bar on a Friday night or a backyard BBQ, when everyone just wants to chill, deep thinkers realize they're carrying an overly sensitive emotional antenna. They know who's angry, who's sad, who's anxious. Speaking up gets them labeled. Reading too much into things and staying quiet feels like holding a huge secret in their chest. So they put on the mask, not to deceive others, but to protect themselves from not belonging. I've spent years researching shame and belonging, and I can say this with certainty: we put on masks when we believe our real selves aren't enough. When you believe you're too deep, too sensitive, too serious, or too different, you start to shrink. You trim off the most authentic parts of yourself to match the common rhythm. You try to become a 2D version of a person who was born to live in 4D. And the heartbreaking part is that many deep thinkers don't even realize when they started wearing the mask. They just know they're tired. Tired of acting normal. Tired of wrapping big questions in silence. Tired of pretending they don't see obvious truths. Tired of not being themselves. Masks aren't always bad. Sometimes they're survival tools. They help you get through unsafe environments, fit in, avoid unnecessary conflict. The problem comes when the mask becomes a habit. When you wear it too long, you forget what it feels like to live without hiding any part of yourself. That's when the quiet, persistent fatigue sets in, not just physical, but soul-level exhaustion. You feel the disconnect between who you really are and who society wants you to be. You feel like you're living on airplane mode, only connecting at the minimum level. When deep thinkers say, "I feel like nobody gets me," it's not whining. It's the direct result of shrinking themselves to fit the mold for too long. This isn't your fault, and you don't need to blame yourself. This isn't about right or wrong, it's about recognition. Once you recognize the mask, you can start asking, when do I put it on? Why do I need it? Is it protecting me or just making me smaller? And are there environments, even if it's just a few people, where I can take it off without fear of judgment? Because the truth is, you don't have to dim your light so others feel comfortable. That light is part of you, and if you constantly have to shrink to stay in a room, maybe that room isn't for you. And when we talk about the mask, there's one more thing deep thinkers often experience but rarely name: the paradox of presence. It's the feeling of being both invisible and too visible at the same time. Like no one truly sees you, yet all your emotions and wounds feel exposed under a spotlight. Deep thinkers often tell me they feel like they live between two worlds: an outer world where they have to package themselves to fit in, and a rich inner world that sometimes overwhelms even them. When the outer world can't connect to that depth, they feel invisible. But when they let even a little of their real self show, they suddenly feel too much, too deep, too sensitive, as if opening one small door reveals an entire vast inner landscape that others don't know how to receive. This is exactly why deep thinkers can feel lonely even when surrounded by people. But I want to make a crucial distinction: loneliness versus solitude. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected, misunderstood, left behind. Solitude is the private space where you can breathe and connect with yourself without having to play a role. Deep thinkers experience both, and if they don't understand the difference, they can start believing every moment alone is painful. In reality, solitude is where they can take off the mask, release other people's emotions, and return to their true rhythm. So why do many deep thinkers still feel wounded even in solitude? Why do they feel too sensitive, too easily touched? To answer that, we have to talk about a powerful concept in psychology: the wounded healer archetype. Deep thinkers often feel deeply from a very young age. They pick up on family tensions, the things no one says out loud, the emotions adults thought were well hidden. And when no one explains it to them, they learn to interpret the world through their own emotional intuition. That creates extraordinary empathy, but it also leaves subtle wounds: the feeling of not being understood, the pressure to be stronger than their age, the sense of being different from everyone around them. Those wounds don't make them weaker. On the contrary, they open up an inner depth where they learn to listen, heal, and hold others with authenticity. But if they don't know how to care for those wounds, the wounds tire them out. Vulnerability doesn't disappear when you grow up. It becomes part of you. And if you were never taught how to protect it with boundaries, self-care, self-compassion, you become more easily hurt than others. But this is also where the strength of deep thinkers emerges. I often say, wounds don't make you less, they just make you more real. When you understand yourself, understand what hurt you, how you experience the world, and that your sensitivity isn't a flaw, you start turning it into strength. But that transformation only happens when you stop and truly sit with yourself, without judgment, without self-blame, without trying to fix yourself, just acknowledging, this is me, this is my depth, this is how I feel. Self-compassion is something very few deep thinkers were taught. We were taught how to read others, please others, hold others, but rarely how to hold ourselves. And when you don't know how to hold yourself, you shrink more easily, believe you're a burden more easily, believe you have to stay quiet to be loved. That's not true. The truth is, you deserve space to feel deeply without shame. You deserve solitude without having to explain it. You deserve to be seen, not the shrunken version, but the whole you. When deep thinkers learn to embrace themselves instead of shrinking, they don't just heal their wounds. They step into their real power, the ability to see deeply without drowning, to feel without burning out, to connect without losing themselves. And when they learn that, solitude becomes a place of rebirth instead of escape. Loneliness fades, making room for belonging, a kind of belonging that starts with you. Because you can only belong to the world once you belong to yourself first. And once you've learned to come home to yourself, once you start recognizing both the wounds and the strength that come from your inner depth, the next question always arises. So where do I find people like me? People who understand my depth, who aren't afraid of it, who don't shrink away from it. One of the biggest misconceptions deep thinkers carry is the belief that they're rare, that no one else out there operates on the same frequency. That's not true. Deep thinkers aren't rare. They're just scattered. They don't gather in loud crowds. They're not at the center of parties. They don't usually show up in shallow conversations. They're like subtle lights you can only see when you step into the right space. The key isn't finding a lot of people, it's finding the right ones. True belonging isn't about fitting everywhere. It's about finding the places where you don't have to shrink. So how do you recognize people on the same frequency? The funny thing is, deep thinkers have incredibly strong inner sonar. You recognize them by the questions they ask, by the way they actually listen instead of waiting for their turn to speak, by eyes that linger a little longer, like they're trying to understand what you haven't said yet, by the fact that they're not afraid of silence, by the fact that they don't need you to over-explain. They're the people who, when you talk about pain, don't try to fix you, they sit with you in it. When you talk about dreams, they don't mock how big they are. When you talk about abstract or profound things, they don't look at you like you're from another planet. People on the same frequency don't dodge your depth, and they don't force you to play shallow so they feel comfortable. So where do you find them? Places that nurture depth are rarely loud. You might find them in small local book clubs, libraries, art classes, healing workshops, galleries, creative communities, or even in a quiet coffee shop where someone is writing or reading alone. You can find them in research environments where big questions are welcome, or in volunteer groups and community work where compassion is the natural bridge between people. Some deep thinkers find their people in therapy or support groups because that's where vulnerability is not just accepted, it's encouraged. But no matter where you look, one word remains essential. Boundaries help you recognize who gets to walk with you into that depth and who shouldn't enter your emotional safe zone. Not everyone needs to understand you. Not everyone can be your person, and that's perfectly okay. All you need is a few people who can hear your language, the language of truth, subtle emotion, and layered thoughts. When you find them, you'll feel something very special, belonging without having to trade away yourself. Belonging that doesn't require shrinking. This is the kind of connection that nourishes you instead of draining you. The kind where you feel fully seen. The kind where you don't have to prepare a mask before walking in. Deep thinkers don't need millions of people to understand them. They just need a few, the right ones. And the beautiful thing is, the more you live authentically, the less you shrink, the more you honor your own boundaries, the more you emit a frequency that people like you can pick up. Authenticity is the strongest signal for attracting souls of the same depth. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong anywhere, know this. There is a place for you. There are people looking for you at the same time you're looking for them. And you'll recognize them not by introductions, but by the feeling, finally, I don't have to perform. Once you've found people who can hear your language, the final and perhaps most important question appears. How do you keep living authentically in a world that's used to surface level everything? This is where I invite you into a call to authenticity. An invitation to return to yourself in a way that is both courageous and deeply compassionate. Because here's the truth. The world needs deep thinkers now more than ever. We live in an era where speed sometimes matters more than quality, noise is valued over nuance, and quick answers are prized over the right questions. In the middle of all that, people like you who pause to feel, to analyze, to ask, to look deeper are not annoying exceptions. You are the necessary counterbalance. You carry what I call the three healing elements of humanity: courage, compassion, and connection. Courage to face truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Deep thinkers have a special kind of courage, the courage to face their own depth, to look at what others avoid, to admit real feelings instead of choosing safe pretense. Compassion to love without losing yourself. You feel others' pain, you listen without judgment, you see what they're too scared to say. But compassion only lasts when you learn to direct it toward yourself too. Connection to build real relationships, not based on roles, not based on shrinking to fit, but based on letting yourself be fully seen. Authenticity isn't shouting, "This is me, accept it." It's the quiet courage to say, "This is the real me, and I'm done abandoning myself." When you live authentically, you don't shake the world with noise. You change it with depth. You become a reminder that kindness isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. That sensitivity isn't a burden, it's humanity's radar. That deep thinking isn't abnormal, it's a sign of awakening consciousness. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you after everything we've walked through from the beginning until now, it's this: you are not alone. You are not too much. You are not wrong. You're just living at a depth the world isn't used to, yet desperately needs. And the most beautiful thing about depth, it doesn't ask you to become shallower. It only asks you to learn to stand firmly in yourself. Protect your energy, find the right people to walk with you, and give the world what you were born to bring: truth, feeling, and compassion. You are the light in the dark, the depth beneath the surface, the reminder that humans were made to truly connect. Keep being you, deeply, bravely, and full of love. The world needs that. The world needs you. Thank you for spending this time here with me. If you want to continue the journey of self-discovery with more deep content, remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything. See you in the next shares, where we keep stepping deeper into the world of authenticity and connection.